single mother hit by Millionaire. But suddenly, John Carter was a man accustomed to the frenetic pace of his life. As a successful businessman in New York City, he was always racing against the clock, juggling meetings, strategic decisions, and high-profile events. But that morning, something felt different. His thoughts were clouded, an inexplicable restlessness consuming him. He left his mansion in an upscale neighborhood, climbed into his sports car, and sped off in a hurry, failing to notice the usual coffee his housekeeper had prepared for him. As he drove through the bustling streets, the chaotic morning traffic seemed to conspire against him. Growing impatient, John pressed harder on the accelerator, skillfully weaving between slower cars. When he finally approached a red light, he hesitated for a brief moment, but his preoccupied mind failed to register the warning. He drove through it, oblivious to the imminent danger. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. The impact was sudden and brutal. A female figure, distractedly crossing the crosswalk, was violently thrown to the ground. John slammed on the brakes, the world around him seeming to slow down as if in slow motion. His heart pounded as he rushed out of the car, his expensive shoes slipping on the hot asphalt. The woman lay on the ground, her face partially obscured by a strand of disheveled brown hair. Blood stained the pavement, but what shocked him most was her gaze, vivid and intense despite the pain. She tried to speak, her words halting and strained. "Please, don't leave me alone." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the weight of her plea was crushing. John, feeling more powerless than he ever had in his life, responded in a voice that was firm yet laden with guilt. "I promise I won't leave you." Bystanders had already called an ambulance, and the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. As they waited, John remained kneeling beside the woman, holding her hand. He knew this moment would change his life forever, though he couldn't yet grasp how. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the paramedics worked with precision to stabilize Emily, the woman John had hit. He didn't know her name yet, but he watched with a mix of guilt and desperation as they secured her onto the stretcher and loaded her into the vehicle. The sound of the approaching sirens was muffled compared to the deafening noise of his own thoughts. "I'm coming with you," John said, his tone almost demanding, as the paramedics closed the ambulance doors. One of them hesitated, but, seeing the determination in John's eyes and hearing the resolve in his voice, nodded in agreement. During the ride to the hospital, John couldn't take his eyes off Emily. Even unconscious, she seemed to carry an expression of resilience, like someone who had faced far too many challenges to give up easily. He gripped the seat tightly, trying to contain the rising tide of anxiety within him. Chaotic thoughts flooded his mind. Who is she? Will she survive? How can I make this right? When they arrived at the hospital, the activity was immediate. Doctors and nurses swiftly took over, wheeling Emily into the emergency room. Before she disappeared behind the double doors, John caught a glimpse of her being surrounded by a whirlwind of technical questions and medical instruments. The feeling of powerlessness hit him again, this time even harder. He stood frozen in the corridor, unsure of what to do next. "Sir, are you with her?" A nurse's voice jolted him out of his trance. "Yes," he replied quickly. "I brought her here. I want to know whatever is necessary. We're doing everything we can to stabilize her. Someone will update you as soon as we have news." The nurse offered a brief, polite smile before disappearing down another hallway. John sank into one of the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting area, his gaze fixed on the ceramic-tiled floor. Every second felt like an eternity, and the growing sense that his life was spiraling out of control became almost unbearable. The silence of the room was occasionally interrupted by the sound of footsteps and the hushed voices of hospital staff. Then he remembered her words. "Please, don't leave me alone." The memory burned inside him like a fire. He didn't know her, but he felt he couldn't fail her. It was a responsibility he had taken on himself, though he didn't fully understand why. As John anxiously waited for news about Emily, a nurse approached him with a sense of urgency, holding her cell phone. The device vibrated incessantly, its muffled ringtone cutting through the quiet. "It's her phone. Keeps ringing. It might be important," the nurse explained before walking off to tend to another patient. John hesitated before picking up the phone, reading the name on the screen. Sunny Hill School. He frowned, wondering what it could mean. Pressing the button to answer, his voice came out deeper than he intended. "Hello, Mrs. Sanders," a concerned female voice on the other end inquired. "No, this is a friend of hers," John improvised, unsure how to introduce himself. "Is something wrong?" "Yes, it's about her son. It's past time for him to be picked up, and we haven't been able to reach her. He's still here at school. Someone needs to come right away." John felt a tightness in his chest. A son. Emily had a young child, waiting alone for a mother who wouldn't come. The guilt, already crushing, now felt unbearable. He tried to keep his composure as he replied, "I'm so sorry. There's been an accident. She's in the hospital right now. Can you help me? Is there a relative or close friend I can contact?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the woman let out a deep sigh. "Mrs. Sanders doesn't have family. She's a single mother. The child's father, well, he's not around. She takes care of everything herself. And now, who's going to pick up the boy?" John closed his eyes, trying to process the information. Emily was alone in the world, with no one to support her. He felt something shift inside him. The pragmatic, calculating man who always dealt with numbers and contracts was now facing a completely different reality. He opened his eyes and responded firmly, "I'll pick him up. I'll send someone I trust right away. Please let him know he'll be safe." Before ending the call, John gave his full name and phone number, assuring the woman that she could contact him if there were any issues. He quickly made a call to his housekeeper, explaining the situation. "Mary, I need you to go pick up Mrs. Sanders' son at Sunny Hill School. It's an emergency. Take care of him until I let you know what to do next." Mary, ever efficient, immediately agreed, promising to handle everything. After hanging up, John sat back down, but his heart felt even heavier. He couldn't shake the image of a child sitting alone, not knowing what was happening to his mother. He wondered how many challenges Emily had faced on her own to raise that boy. And what if she didn't survive the surgery? The overwhelming guilt consumed him like a tidal wave. John remained at the hospital, his gaze alternating between the empty corridor and the watch on his wrist. The wait felt endless. He had already informed Mary about the boy, but his mind wouldn't stop racing about Emily. Would she survive? And if she didn't? The thought of her son, innocently waiting at school, made the anguish all the worse. After some time, his phone rang. It was Mary. "Mr. Carter, I've picked up the boy. He's a sweetheart, but he's very confused and asking for his mom. We're on our way to the mansion. Is there anything else you'd like me to do for now?" "Take him home and make sure he feels safe," John replied, trying to sound calm despite the lump in his throat. "Tell him his mom is in the hospital, but that she's going to be okay. That's the most important thing right now. Don't worry, sir. He's in good hands," Mary reassured him before ending the call. John slipped the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath. The idea of a small, scared child, unable to understand what was happening, affected him in ways he hadn't expected. It felt as if, suddenly, the responsibility for that fragile life had fallen squarely on his shoulders. He didn't know much about children, but he knew he had to do everything possible to make up for his mistake. As his thoughts swirled, a doctor finally emerged from the emergency room. The doctor wore a neutral, almost rehearsed expression, but there was something in his demeanor, a mixture of seriousness and relief. "Mr. Carter?" John stood up immediately, his heart pounding. "Yes, that's me. How is she?" "Emily underwent surgery and is stable now," the doctor replied. There were multiple fractures, but we managed to stabilize her condition. However, she'll need a long recovery period, including intensive physical therapy, as she won't be able to walk for several months. The doctor's words were a mix of relief and daunting reality. Emily was alive, but the road ahead would be filled with challenges. Can she receive visitors yet? John asked. Not just yet. She's sedated and will remain under observation for a few hours. You can wait or come back tomorrow. But we need to address an administrative issue. She doesn't have any health insurance on record here. This means the costs, including physical therapy, will be substantial. Don't worry about that, John said firmly, his voice resolute. I'll take care of everything. Just make sure she gets the best treatment possible. The doctor nodded, seemingly reassured by his response, and walked away. John sat back down, but now his mind was weighed with even more concerns. Emily's recovery would be long and grueling, and he was committing himself not only financially but also emotionally to ensuring she got through it. He made another call to Mary to check on the boy, who he now knew was named Noah. He's playing in the garden, Mary said in a soothing tone, but he's asked about his mom again. I told him she's recovering and that he'll be able to see her soon. Thank you, Mary. Keep taking care of him. I don't know what I'd do without you, John replied, feeling a momentary sense of relief knowing Noah was in good hands. As the night dragged on, John stayed at the hospital, waiting patiently for the moment he could see Emily again. Early the next morning, John sat in a chair in the hospital corridor, his face marked by the exhaustion of a sleepless night. The coffee in his hand had gone cold, but he didn't care. His mind was preoccupied with thoughts of Emily's recovery and what the future might hold for her and Noah. A nurse appeared down the hallway, holding a clipboard. She stopped in front of John and, with a brief smile, said, "Mrs. Sanders is waking up now. You can see her, but please keep it brief. She's still very weak." John stood up immediately, a mixture of relief and nervousness coursing through him. He followed the nurse to Emily's room, where the monotonous beeping of monitoring machines filled the air. Emily lay in the bed, pale, with visible bandages covering several parts of her body. Her eyes, now open, carried a look of confusion and fatigue. "Good morning," John said softly, approaching her cautiously. He noticed her tense slightly at his presence. "It's me, John Carter. I was the one who caused the accident. But please don't worry. I'm here to help." Emily blinked slowly, as if trying to process the words. Her voice came out low and hoarse. "You stayed here the whole time?" "Yes. I promised I wouldn't leave you alone, and I intend to keep that promise." His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of guilt. For a moment, she seemed like she wanted to say something but hesitated. Then, as if a more pressing thought struck her, she asked, "My son, Noah, is he okay?" John offered a reassuring smile. "Yes, he's fine. My housekeeper picked him up from school yesterday, and he's at my home. He's being cared for and is safe. You don't need to worry about him." The immediate relief that washed over Emily's face was palpable. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly turned her gaze away, as if trying to hide her vulnerability. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You don't need to thank me. This was my fault, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right," John replied. He hesitated but felt compelled to be honest. "The doctors said your recovery will take time. You'll need physical therapy and constant care. But please don't worry about the costs. I've already taken care of everything." Emily looked at him, surprised. "I can't afford that. I don't know how I'll manage." "You won't have to pay for anything. Like I said, this is my responsibility. I want you to focus all your energy on recovering for Noah. He needs you, and I'll be here to make sure you have everything you need." This time, she couldn't hold back the tears. "You don't even know me, and you're doing all this. Why?" John paused, searching for the right words. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because For some reason, I feel like there's more to this than just an accident." Emily didn't respond, but she closed her eyes, exhausted. John realized it was time to let her rest. But before leaving, he assured her, "Noah's eager to see you. As soon as you're feeling a little stronger, I'll bring him here. He misses you." She gave a faint nod, and John left the room, the weight in his chest heavy but paired with a renewed determination. 2 days had passed since John and Emily's conversation at the hospital. Though still weak, Emily displayed a quiet strength that impressed everyone around her. John had promised to bring Noah to see her as soon as possible, and now he was on his way to the hospital, the little boy sitting in the back seat of his luxurious car. Noah was restless, clutching tightly a drawing he had made for his mother. In the picture, he had colored a house with a smiling sun shining above it. "Will my mom be okay?" Noah asked suddenly, his voice timid but filled with hope. John glanced at the boy through the rearview mirror. "Yes, Noah. She's recovering well. And you know what? She's going to be so happy to see you." When they arrived at the hospital, Noah gripped John's hand tightly as they walked through the long, white corridors. The boy was visibly nervous, his eyes scanning everything around him, but his determination to see his mom kept him steady. When they reached Emily's room, Noah let go of John's hand and ran to the side of the bed, clutching the drawing he had brought. "Mommy!" he exclaimed, his voice bursting with childish emotion. Emily, who was carefully propped up on pillows, turned her head at the sound of her son's voice. Her eyes instantly filled with tears, and she opened her arms with some difficulty. "Noah, my love." The boy climbed onto the chair beside the bed and leaned in to hug her, with all the care his innocence allowed. He rested his head on her shoulder, staying there as if that embrace was all he needed to feel safe again. Emily kissed his hair, whispering words of comfort. John watched the scene closely, not wanting to interrupt but unable to hide the lump forming in his throat. He realized there was something extraordinary about the bond between mother and son. It wasn't just love, it was a strength that seemed to transcend any hardship. After a few moments, Noah pulled back slightly and held up the drawing. "I made this for you, Mommy. Look, it's our house, and there's a smiling sun because he's happy, just like me." Emily held the paper with trembling hands, admiring her son's effort. "It's beautiful, Noah. I'll keep it forever. You're my special boy." Noah beamed and held her hand again, while John finally stepped closer, respecting their moment. "I'm glad to see you two together. I thought it was important for you to see each other." Emily looked at John, and for a brief moment, her eyes reflected something deeper than gratitude. It was hard to define, but there was a mixture of admiration and respect. "Thank you. You didn't have to do all this, but you did. I'll never forget it." John shook his head, trying to deflect the weight of her words. "It was the least I could do, and I'll do much more if I have to." As Noah played with a small toy car John had brought, the two adults continued to talk in low voices. Emily seemed less guarded, allowing herself to relax a little more. Despite the difficult circumstances, there was a renewed energy in the room, as if this meeting had restored something essential for both of them. After the meeting with Noah at the hospital, John found himself thinking more frequently about Emily and the boy's future. He knew her recovery would be challenging, and the thought of Emily returning to her small apartment with no elevator deeply concerned him. This led him to make a decision that some might consider bold, but he believed it was the most practical. Later that day, he returned to the hospital. Upon entering Emily's room, he noticed she looked slightly more flushed, a subtle sign of progress. Noah was sitting beside her, engrossed in a picture book John had brought him. "Emily, could I have a word with you?" he asked, flashing a reassuring smile at Noah. Emily nodded and looked at her son. "Noah, why don't you show your book to the nurse? I'm sure she'll love your stories." The boy hesitated for a moment but eventually climbed down from his chair, book in hand. He walked to the door and glanced at John before leaving, as if seeking his approval. John gave him a calm nod and waited until he was out of the room. "I've been thinking," John began, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "When you're discharged, going back to your apartment might not be the best option. The small has a lot of stairs, and you'll need constant care. I don't want you to worry about that while you're trying to recover." Emily furrowed her brow, her expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. "What are you suggesting, John? My house has everything you need: space, accessibility, and a team that can help. My housekeeper is already caring for Noah and loves children. You could stay there until you're fully recovered. I'm not saying this to invade your life, but because I want you to have the best support possible." Emily was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. She knew her apartment was far from ideal, especially now that she would be physically limited. However, the idea of accepting such generosity made her uncomfortable. "John, I don't know if I can accept this. Feels like too much. You've already done so much for us." "It's not too much," he replied, his voice firm with determination. "I see it as an extension of the promise I made. I want you to focus on getting better, and I want Noah to have a safe place while that happens. All I'm asking is for you to consider it." She looked at him, trying to decipher his intentions. There was no arrogance or condescension in his expression, only sincerity. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll think about it, but thank you. Truly." John let out a small sigh of relief, smiling gently. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. Just think about what's best for you and Noah." Before John could leave, Noah returned to the room, clutching his picture book. He climbed back onto the chair and smiled at both of them, blissfully unaware of the weighty conversation that had just taken place. The boy's cheerful and innocent presence seemed to dissipate any lingering tension in the air. After days of contemplation, Emily decided to accept John's offer. Though hesitant, she understood the practicality of the situation. Her priority was Noah, and the environment John provided seemed like the best option to ensure his safety and well-being while she recovered. The following morning, John arrived at the hospital with a calm smile and an optimistic tone that eased some of her anxiety. "So, are you ready for your new temporary home?" he asked, a sparkle in his eyes. Emily forced a smile, still uneasy about the arrangement. "I think so. I just hope I'm not imposing." "You're not," John assured her. "In fact, it's nice to have company. My house has been very quiet over the years," he added, with a hint of vulnerability she didn't expect. Shortly after, Emily was discharged with strict medical instructions. John had arranged for a comfortable vehicle adapted to her needs. Noah, who was already at the mansion under Mary's care, eagerly awaited her arrival. When they finally arrived, he was the first to run to her, holding her hands with joy. Emily barely had time to admire the mansion's exterior, but as she entered, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The expansive foyer was illuminated by an imposing chandelier, and the luxurious details in every corner left her speechless. John noticed her expression of awe and tried to lighten the mood with a playful tone. "I know it's a bit much, but I hope you'll feel at home." "A bit?" Emily replied with a faint smile. "This feels like a movie set." Mary, the housekeeper, approached to greet her warmly. "Welcome, Mrs. Sanders. We're all here to help. If you need anything at all, just let me know." Emily thanked her, feeling slightly more at ease. Mary then led her to the suite prepared especially for her. The room was spacious, decorated in soft tones, with a large window offering a stunning view of the garden. In the corner, there was even a crib set up for Noah. Every detail had been carefully considered. "This is so much more than I could have imagined," Emily murmured, still taking it all in. She turned to John, who was leaning against the doorframe, watching her. "Thank you. Truly. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me. Just focus on getting better," he said gently but firmly. While Noah explored the room with curiosity, Emily sat on the bed, visibly emotional. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of relief, as if she could finally breathe without the constant weight of hardship. John, noticing she needed a moment, gave a subtle gesture to Mary. "I'll leave you to settle in. Mary will be here if you need anything." As he left the room, he glanced back for a brief moment, catching a glimpse of Emily embracing Noah as she tried to hold back tears. There was something deeply moving about the scene, more than he was willing to admit to himself. The days began to pass surprisingly harmoniously at the mansion. Noah seemed to adapt quickly to the new environment. He ran through the gardens, explored the spacious rooms, and befriended the staff, especially Mary, who had a natural knack for dealing with children. Emily, on the other hand, faced the start of her recovery with a mix of determination and vulnerability. John had hired the best physical therapists to assist her daily, and she soon realized the process would be painful and exhausting. There were moments when she felt on the verge of giving up, but every time she looked at Noah or thought about his future, she found the strength to keep going. One sunny morning, while Emily was in the living room practicing exercises with her physical therapist, Noah burst in, laughing loudly and carrying something in his hands. He climbed onto the couch and proudly announced, "Mommy, look what I found. It's a guitar." Emily's eyes widened, surprised by her son's enthusiasm. Before she could respond, John appeared at the door, a playful smile on his face. "Looks like our little explorer found my music room." "You have a music room?" Emily asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "Yes," John replied, his eyes gleaming. "It belonged to my mom. She loved music. She always wanted me to learn, but honestly, I wasn't as talented as she hoped. The room's been kind of forgotten." Noah, without waiting for an invitation, grabbed John's hand and pulled him along. "You have to show Mommy. It'll be fun." John chuckled, unable to resist the boy's enthusiasm. "All right, I'll show her. But, Emily, only if you're comfortable." She hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed. The group followed Noah to the music room, located on the ground floor in a quieter corner of the mansion. When Emily entered, she was taken aback. The space was warm and inviting, with wood-paneled walls and an immaculate collection of instruments. A grand piano, violins, guitars, and even a saxophone. "This is incredible," Emily said as her eyes roamed over every detail. "Do you play?" John asked, curious. "I used to play the piano," she replied, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "I learned in the orphanage. It was a way to escape, I suppose. But it's been years since I've played." "Then why not try now?" John suggested, motioning toward the piano. Emily looked at him, hesitant, but something in his encouraging tone made her agree. With John's help, she sat down on the piano bench. The keys felt familiar yet distant at the same time. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to recall a piece she used to play. Her fingers finally found the notes of a gentle melody, starting hesitantly but growing more confident with each measure. The music filled the room, creating a sense of peace and nostalgia. When she finished, she noticed Noah sitting on the floor, listening intently, and John leaning against the wall with a genuine smile on his face. "That was wonderful," John said, breaking the silence. "You have real talent, Emily. Truly." She blushed slightly, looking away. "It's just a hobby. Talent like yours shouldn't be just a hobby," he insisted. "Think about it. You have something special." Emily only smiled, unsure how to respond. But when she looked at Noah, who clapped enthusiastically, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope that there might be more waiting for her beyond recovery. In the days that followed, the music room became a sanctuary for Emily. Whenever she had a break from her physical therapy routine, she found solace at the piano, rediscovering her passion for music. Noah loved sitting beside her, banging on the keys clumsily but with a pure joy that made Emily laugh. John, meanwhile, began paying closer attention to these moments. Whenever he walked past the music room and heard the delicate notes Emily played, he made a point to stop and listen. It was as if the melodies filled a void in his life he hadn't realized existed. One evening, after a quiet dinner, John had an idea. While Emily was in her room with Noah, he went to his study and picked up the phone. He called an old friend, Richard Hayes, a renowned music agent. "Richard, it's John. I need a favor," he began. "Of course, tell me," Richard replied, surprised. "What do you need this time, John?" "Another donation for a charity event." John chuckled softly, but his tone turned serious almost immediately. "Actually, it's something different. I want you to meet someone. She has incredible talent. I need you to hear her." "Talent? That doesn't sound like your usual world," Richard teased, though his interest was evident. "Send me something, and I'll see what I can do." John hung up the phone and sat in thought for a few minutes. He needed to record Emily playing without her knowing because he was certain that if he asked her directly, she would refuse. The following evening, he found his opportunity. After Noah had gone to bed, Emily decided to go to the music room to play something that had been on her mind. She sat at the piano, and the melody that emerged was gentle yet deeply emotional. John entered silently and stood in the doorway, watching her in quiet admiration. She was so absorbed in her playing that she didn't notice his presence. Seizing the moment, he recorded her performance on his phone. When she finished, he clapped, causing her to startle. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. That was incredible." Emily smiled shyly. "I was just distracting myself for a bit." "Well, it's more than just a distraction," he said sincerely. "You truly have a gift, Emily." She chuckled softly but didn't respond. There was still a part of her that couldn't fully believe what she was hearing. Later that night, John sent the recording to Richard with a brief message. "Here's the talent I mentioned. Let me know what you think." He knew he was taking a risk, but something inside him told him Emily deserved this chance. As he prepared for bed, John looked out of his bedroom window, reflecting on how Emily and Noah had brought life into his house, and, in some ways, into his life. He felt himself becoming more and more involved, though he still struggled to fully grasp what it all meant. The next morning, John received Richard's reply. The message was brief but brimming with enthusiasm. "She has something unique. We need to talk ASAP. Bring her to my office this week." John read the message several times, thinking about how to approach Emily. He knew she would be hesitant, perhaps even skeptical. However, he believed the opportunity was too significant to ignore. During breakfast, he watched Emily and Noah at the table, noticing how their presence filled the house with an energy it hadn't had in years. "Emily," he began. As Noah finished his bowl of cereal, "Can I talk to you about something important?" She looked up, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Of course. What is it?" "I showed a recording of you playing and singing to a friend of mine. He's a respected music agent. He was impressed and wants to meet you." Emily blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. "You did what?" "You showed a recording of me to an agent." "Yes," he replied calmly, carefully choosing his words. "I know I should have asked for your permission, but I knew you'd say no, and I truly believe you have an extraordinary talent." "He thinks so too. He wants to give you a chance." She fell silent, her mind flooded with a mix of emotions. Part of her was irritated that he had acted without consulting her, but another part, one she tried to suppress, was curious and even hopeful. "John, I don't know what to say. I wasn't expecting this. And honestly, I don't know if I'm ready for something like this." "You don't have to decide now," he said, his tone soothing. "Just think about it. This could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." After breakfast, Emily spent the day reflecting on the offer. The idea of putting herself in the public eye frightened her, but deep down, something yearned for the chance. Later, as she played with Noah in the garden, she noticed how his smile lit up everything around him. He deserved more. He deserved a mother who didn't just survive but truly lived. That evening, while she sat in the living room, John entered with 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one and sat in the chair opposite her. "You seem worried," he said after a moment of silence. "I am," she admitted. "My life has never been about taking risks. It's always been about surviving. This chance you're offering me, I don't know if I'm good enough." John leaned forward, his gaze steady on hers. "Emily, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe in you. And you know what? Noah will be proud of you no matter what happens." She gripped the wine glass more firmly, feeling the weight of his words. There was truth in them, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. "Okay," she finally said with a deep sigh. "I'll meet this agent. But, John, I'm not promising anything. That's all I need to hear," he replied, smiling. On the day of the meeting with Richard Hayes, Emily was visibly nervous. As she got ready, her mind was overwhelmed with thoughts of all the ways it could go wrong. She adjusted the simple dress she had chosen, feeling inadequate for the sophisticated environment she was about to step into. John, sensing her unease, waited for her in the living room with an encouraging smile. "You look beautiful," John said as soon as she descended the stairs, clutching a small bag with trembling hands. "Thank you," she replied, though her tone lacked conviction. "I can't shake the feeling that I don't belong." "Don't say that. You belong anywhere you choose to be. And today is about showing who you truly are." "Emily," John said, offering her his arm to escort her to the car. The drive to Richard's office was smooth, though Emily's silence filled the space between them. John tried to ease the tension by sharing funny stories about his early experiences in important meetings, which brought a timid smile to her face. When they arrived at the sleek building in the heart of New York City, Emily felt a knot in her stomach. The modern and imposing architecture was intimidating, but John stayed by her side, grounding her. They ascended in a glass elevator that offered a breathtaking view of the city, though Emily barely noticed as they reached Richard's floor. The agent greeted them with warm energy and a smile that immediately eased some of Emily's nerves. "You must be the talented Emily John has told me so much about," he said, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she replied, doing her best to maintain composure. They sat in a spacious room with walls lined with gold and platinum records. Emily couldn't help but glance around, impressed by the display. Richard noticed her admiration and commented, "Hopefully, one day we'll have something of yours hanging here." She laughed nervously, but before she could respond, he continued, "John sent me a recording of you. And, Emily, what I heard was extraordinary. There's something raw yet deeply emotional in your voice. That's rare. I don't know what to say," she murmured, startled by his enthusiasm. "You don't need to say anything right now. I just want you to know that if you decide to pursue this, I'll be here to help you. We'll arrange a professional studio audition, record something with quality, and present it to the right people." Emily looked to John for reassurance. He gave her a small nod, silently encouraging her to trust the process. After a moment of reflection, she said, "I think I can try, but I'll need time to get used to all of this." "Time is what you'll have," Richard assured her. "And trust me, you won't be alone on this journey." On the way home, Emily felt calmer. Although the initial nerves still lingered, she knew she had taken an important step. Beside her, John felt a quiet pride as he watched her begin to believe in herself. "Thank you for encouraging me," she said softly, glancing at him as the car approached the mansion. "I'm just helping you see what was already there," he replied with a smile. In the days that followed, Emily dove into a routine of preparation for the studio audition. Richard had scheduled a session with a renowned producer, and every detail seemed meticulously planned to give her the best possible chance. Emily, however, oscillated between excitement and a fear of failure. Meanwhile, John observed from a distance, silently rooting for her. He didn't want to pressure her but made a point to offer support whenever he could, whether by encouraging her during moments of doubt or helping with Noah so she could focus on her rehearsals. On the morning of the audition, Emily woke early, unable to sleep due to her anxiety. As she sipped coffee in the kitchen, Noah appeared with one of his toys in hand and asked, "Mommy, are you going to sing today?" She smiled, trying to hide her nerves. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm going to sing. You're going to be amazing," he said with the innocent confidence that warmed Emily's heart. Shortly after, John entered the kitchen, ready to take her to the studio. He noticed the tension on her face and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Emily, this isn't a test. It's a chance to show who you are. And who you are is already enough." On the drive to the studio, Emily remained silent, gazing out the window as the buildings blurred past. Her mind replayed the song she had chosen, but deep down, she knew the biggest challenge wasn't the performance itself. It was believing she deserved to be there. When they arrived, Richard greeted them with enthusiasm and introduced her to the producer, a middle-aged man with a warm smile named David. He shook Emily's hand and said, "I've heard your recording. I'm excited to hear you live. Let's get started whenever you're ready." The studio was intimidating at first glance, with sophisticated equipment and a pristine recording booth. Emily took a deep breath as John and Richard watched her from an adjacent room. David adjusted the microphone and encouraged her, "Take all the time you need. This is your song." She nodded, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to sing. Her voice filled the room with an intensity and emotion that seemed to captivate everyone present. The notes, timid at first, grew powerful as she fully surrendered to the melody. When she finished, the room fell silent for a few moments, as if everyone was still processing the impact. Richard was the first to speak. "That was incredible, Emily. I knew you were good, but this exceeded all my expectations." David nodded enthusiastically. "Your tone is unique, and your emotion is so raw and genuine. That's rare. With the right guidance, you could go very far." Emily could barely believe what she was hearing. The tension that had accompanied her all day began to dissipate, replaced by a mix of relief and joy. She looked at John through the studio window, and he smiled, giving her a thumbs up of approval. "And now?" she asked, still trying to process everything. "Now we begin," Richard replied, his confidence making her feel that this was just the start of something much bigger. After the studio audition, Emily's life began to change rapidly. Richard kept his promise and connected her with professionals in the music industry who were impressed by her talent. Small contracts were signed, starting with intimate performances in cafes and private events around New York City. Though modest, these opportunities were significant steps for someone who had never imagined being in the spotlight. Noah, as always, was her greatest motivation. He beamed with pride every time he heard someone praise his mom, and sometimes he even attended her rehearsals, clapping enthusiastically at the end of every song. Emily was often amazed at how well he seemed to adapt to the changes, as if he instinctively understood they were building something together. As Emily's career began to take shape, John watched it all with admiration. He remained a steadfast pillar of support, always present, never overstepping. She knew that his generosity and encouragement had been instrumental in getting her this far. Yet, there was something in his glances and gestures that left her intrigued, a kindness that seemed to go beyond mere friendship. One evening, after a performance at a small cafe in Brooklyn, Emily found John waiting for her outside. He was leaning against the car, hands in his pockets, watching the bustling street. When she approached, he greeted her with a warm smile. "You were amazing tonight," he said, handing her a coat to shield her from the chilly wind. "Thank you," Emily replied, slipping it on. "It still feels surreal hearing that. I never thought I'd be on a stage. You deserve all of this, Emily. And more," he said with a sincerity that made her heart race. She remained silent for a moment, looking at him. This man, who had entered her life so unexpectedly, had become someone indispensable. Yet, something held her back from moving beyond their careful closeness. Perhaps it was the fear of trusting too much. Perhaps it was the scars of her past. "John," she began hesitantly, her voice uncertain. "Why do you do all this for me? Not just helping with Noah and my recovery, but everything. The music. You could have just gone on with your life." He met her gaze, as if searching for the right words. "Because from the moment I saw you, I knew my life wouldn't be the same. It wasn't just the accident. It was you. Something about you touched me in a way I can't explain. And helping you and Noah, it gives me a sense of purpose I didn't realize I was missing." Emily felt the weight of his words and looked away, unable to hide the emotion that rose within her. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice trembling. "You don't need to say anything," he replied, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I just wanted you to know." The drive back to the mansion was quiet but not uncomfortable. Emily was lost in thought, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. She knew feelings were developing between them, but she also knew she wasn't ready to confront them yet. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, she looked at him sleeping peacefully and whispered, "We're doing well, my love. One day at a time." As the weeks passed, Emily's confidence grew, both on stage and in her personal life. Her schedule of performances began to take shape, and Richard secured an opportunity for her to open for a popular local singer. It was a chance that could solidify her position as a rising artist. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Noah had become the heart of the house. His laughter echoed through the halls, and he seemed to have won over not just John's heart, but also that of the entire staff. Emily noticed how Noah looked up to John as a figure of support, often running to him to show a drawing or ask for help with a toy. One evening, after putting Noah to bed, Emily came downstairs to the living room and found John sitting in an armchair near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He seemed lost in thought, watching the flames dance. "May I join you?" she asked softly. John looked up and smiled. "Of course. There's always room for you here." She sat down on the sofa beside him, crossing her legs and pulling a blanket over her feet. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was something in the air that night, a delicate tension neither seemed willing to break. "John," she began carefully, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night, after the show." He turned slightly to face her, his attention fully on her. "About how we changed your life," she continued, her eyes fixed on the glass he held. "I think you've changed mine too, and not just because of the help. It's more than that. You made me believe I could dream again." John placed the glass on the nearby table and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily, you gave me something I didn't even realize I'd lost. I was living on autopilot, surrounded by luxury but completely empty. You and Noah brought life back to this house and to me. Honestly, I don't ever want to go back to the way things were." Her heart raced at his words, but she knew she couldn't ignore her fears. "John, I don't know if I'm ready for this, for whatever this is. My life has always been full of loss, and I don't know if I can take that risk again." He nodded slowly, understanding evident in his eyes. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what path you choose. I'm not going anywhere." Emily felt a wave of relief and emotion. John's honesty touched her in a way she couldn't ignore, though she knew there was still a long road ahead to overcome the walls she'd built over the years. She smiled shyly and placed a gentle hand on his. "Thank you for understanding." John covered her hand with his other and gave her a small smile before steering the conversation towards something lighter, allowing the discussion to flow without pressure. The rest of the evening was filled with stories and laughter, bringing a sense of normalcy they both cherished. The big day had arrived. Emily was about to open for one of New York's most well-known singers, and the anticipation was electric. The small auditorium was packed, with soft lights illuminating the stage as the technical team made the final adjustments. Backstage, Emily's heart raced. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that Richard had chosen specifically for the occasion, and clutched a necklace Noah had given her that morning. "It's going to be great, Mommy," he had said in his sweet voice, handing her the star-shaped pendant. John stood beside her backstage, watching as she took deep breaths and adjusted the microphone. He knew this was a pivotal moment for Emily, but also for him. Everything he felt for her seemed to converge in that instant, and he silently willed her to shine with all his heart. "Emily," John said softly as he stepped closer, "remember, tonight is about you and your music. Nothing else matters. Just be yourself." She looked at him, finding comfort in his words and his presence. "Thank you, John, for everything." The sound of the announcer calling her name echoed through the auditorium. Emily glanced at John one last time, and he nodded with an encouraging smile. Then, she walked onto the stage, greeted by a wave of applause, as the warm lights enveloped her. As she began to sing, her voice filled the room with a power and emotion that immediately captivated the audience. The song was an original composition inspired by her journey, filled with struggles, love, and hope. Every note carried a piece of her story, and the sight of Noah's shining eyes in the audience gave her the courage to keep going. Backstage, John watched with a mix of pride and admiration. He knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, not just a moment of success, but the rebirth of a woman who had fought so hard to reach this point. When the song ended, the silence was replaced by an eruption of applause and cheers. Emily, overwhelmed with emotion, looked out into the crowd and saw Noah standing and clapping enthusiastically next to Mary. John was farther back, smiling with tears in his eyes. After the show, while the audience still buzzed with praise for her performance, Emily returned backstage and was greeted by a tight hug from Noah. "You were amazing, Mommy." John approached soon after, holding a bouquet of flowers. "For the star of the night," he said, handing her the bouquet. Emily laughed, though her eyes glistened with tears. "You were right, John. I just needed to believe in myself. And now you see what I've always seen," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. For a moment, the two stood in silence, gazing at each other. Then, Emily stepped forward and, before she could hesitate, embraced him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if silently promising never to let her fall. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. "I never would," he replied. That night, as they drove back to the mansion, Noah slept in the back seat, clutching Emily's necklace like a trophy. She gazed out the window, feeling more alive and whole than she ever had before. Beside her, John drove with a serene smile, and she knew her journey didn't end there. It was just the beginning of a new life, one filled with possibilities, music, and perhaps something more. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.